For most racing fans, video games are the closest that they'll get to actually planting their butts in the race car's seat. Pay a small to medium sum of money, and you can drive a GT3 in the comfort of your own home, without having to worry about pesky things like consumables, wrecking, or even wearing clothes. Yeah, you miss out on, actually driving the car, but that's out of reach for 99% of the population. Firing up that racing game of choice is your best bet at simulating what these automotive athletes go through half the year. But what if that cool car you read about or saw in a YouTube video hasn't shown up in any games? Then what? You rely on modded content which varies in quality, or, if the car is obscure enough, shrug your shoulders and ruthlessly add the car to forum wishlists that likely go unread. 3D modeling cars is a time-consuming process, to say nothing of licensing and programming the car to drive properly. This means that the same cars tend to show up in many games. A significant chunk of all the racing's motley bunch of competitors have never been officially replicated in a game. This video is going over 5 of them. Because of the greater number of cars covered compared to the typical Featherfin video, I'm sacrificing some detail. This also leaves more room to cover some of these cars in future standalone videos. In the meantime, Lensler made videos about the Mercedes and the Lola that you can check out right now. Now let's cover these cars in chronological order. Let's start with a car from an era built on quicksand. Group C in the early 1990s was sent to an early grave by one Bernie Eccleston, who feared its popularity would overtake Formula 1. He convinced the FIA to mandate that the cars use F1-styled engines, while the FIA Sports Car Championship would run a schizophrenic schedule requiring an excessive amount of air and sea freight. The cars resulting from these rules were at the very least spectacularly fast and nice to look at, though unsustainable in the long term. Toyota's TS010 was one of the few that lasted over a year. These new rules would require a fresh start from Toyota. The V8 dating back to 1988 would be illegal in the WSC from 1992 onwards. Fuel consumption limits were also abolished, as most of the WSC races would be sprint races barring the 24 hours of Le Mans. This meant a brand new engine. Enter the RV10, Toyota's very first V10 engine. V10s are quite a rare engine layout and exist in high-performance applications where a V8 may not produce the desired power and the V12 is too heavy and complex. Toyota's attempt to produce over 700 horsepower, but was restricted to about 600 for the longer races. This level of power from a naturally aspirated engine this small meant high revs, and the RV10 could rev to over 12,000 RPM. This isn't the highest revving engine covered so far on this channel. Another record that the TS010 breaks is its unique 5-valve cylinder heads, allowing more airflow than the typical 4-valve heads in most of the cars that Featherfin has covered in the past and will cover in the future. Minimum weight would also tumble to 750 kilograms. After testing the engine in a 90 CV Mule, Toyota realized that the dome-developed chassis wasn't going to cut it and commissioned Tony Southgate to draw up an entirely fresh design. Southgate penned the Jaguar Group C cars before the XR14, as well as the Envy-winning Eagles, so the man knew a few things about race-winning cars. You can sort of see the old Jaguars in the TS010's flowing lines. Anyway, the TS010 relied on ground effect to produce cartoonish levels of downforce. A pair of underbody tunnels was aided by a twin-tier rear wing. The upper air element produced downforce with the clean air flowing above the car, while the lower element acted as an air extractor to speed up airflow from the big ground effect tunnels. Suspension would be double wishbone with push rods, as was common in Formula 1 at the time, and would become the standard for top-flight race cars. Unsurprisingly, the chassis and bodywork were made of carbon fiber to hit the significantly lower weight limit. The TS010's least state-of-the-art characteristic was its 6-speed manual gearbox. Sequential transmissions were limited to Formula 1, for the most part. Unfortunately for the TS010, The other car running a sequential gearbox was the Peugeot 905, its arch rival. With the insane potential pace of the TS010, the soon-to-be obsolete gearbox type left speed and ease of use on the table. Overall, the TS010 was a solid representation of the 3.5-liter Group C class. Insane aerodynamics, a screaming engine, and run by a competent team. The TS010 would be ready to race by the end of 1991 and debuted in the final race of the WSC season at Autopolis in Japan. The Thomas-run car came home in 6th out of 17 cars, 3 laps in arrears of the victorious Mercedes C292. Now, for the infamous testing moment we've all been waiting for. Between the TS010's first race and the 1992 WSC's inaugural race, Toyota went testing at Eastern Creek Raceway, now Sydney Williamsport Park in Australia, for about a week. The first corner was a rasped left-hander with a sizable bump that most cars have to lift for, but the TS010 took it flat out, at 190 miles an hour. The TS010 handled the bump just fine, but Andy Wallace and Hitoshi Ogawa's ribs didn't, thanks to an ill-fitting seat. Toyota Team Thomas entered 2 cars for the full season and brought a third for Le Mans. The thousands of miles of testing paid off, with the TS010 taking victory at the season's inaugural race in Monza and looking set to make it 2 wins in a row at Silverstone before an electrical failure put paid to those chances. The second car had an engine failure. Le Mans wouldn't be as successful as the Monza win, but not as disappointing as the Silverstone double DNF. Le Mans 1992 would be a wet one, and the TS010's good years were useless in the wet compared to Peugeot's Michelins and Mazda's Dunlops. Not even the 6,000 pounds of downforce could save them from losing ground to those two until the track's surface wasn't as moist as the Sarthe River. When the conditions improved, Toyota ran at new qualifying pace to try and close the distance, but Peugeot had opened an insurmountable gap. For its efforts, the TS010 would take Toyota's first in a long string of second-place finishes at Le Mans, losing out to Peugeot. After Le Mans 1992, the TS010 would never win an international race but won 2 in Japan, beating out the mighty Nissan R92 CP which had to run the fuel regulations and the Toyota 92 CVs. The WSC and the JSPC would collapse at the end of 1992, leaving the TS010 with only 3 places to race: IMSA, the Suzuka 1000 km, and Le Mans 1993. IMSA was a no-go thanks to Toyota already having a significant presence there as their Eagle Mark III was clearly crushing GTP. The standalone Suzuka 1000 km race were struggling for entrance, and Toyota didn't want to race themselves. The TS010 would only race once in 1993 in an attempt to improve on the podium finish in the prior year. Like 1992, Toyota would bring 3 cars. As half the C1 cars left, Le Mans should be a cakewalk, right? Wrong. The other remaining C1 cars were fielded by none other than Peugeot. Toyota ditched Goodyear for Michelin after 1992, but the race conditions were the polar opposite of the prior years. Le Mans 1993 would be a hot and dry affair. Despite splitting the Peugeots in qualifying, the Toyotas had nothing for the ironclad team in the race. A 4th, 8th, and DNF would be the best TS010 could muster against the Peugeot podium lockout. With the end of Le Mans 1993, the TS010 racing career would end as prototype racing worldwide faced extinction thanks to rule instability and the sagging global economy. With its insane performance, august looks, and V10 soundtrack, you'd think the TS010 would be a no-brainer to include in video games, right? Strangely enough, this rarity and virtual appearances extends to all the 905's direct competition. Unlike the CLR, which we will talk about later, Toyota doesn't mind talking about the TS010, because if the brand was embarrassed by the cars that didn't win Le Mans, they only have 2 cars they talk about. I believe the problem lies in what happened to the cars after the program ended. Toyota normally keeps its factory race cars in storage after their career ends, wheeling them out only for exhibitions. Most of the cars appear to be in Japan, and only one track-focused developer, which is Polyphony Digital, is based there. at least 2 rest in Europe. This car fit perfectly in Gran Turismo, yet they chose to Minolta sponsor 88CV out of serendipitous convenience, as that car was on public display when Gran Turismo 4 was in development. Despite more TS010s existing in their original state than 88CVs, Toyota never thought to stick them in the mall to attract viewers for extended periods of time. The TS010 appears to be a car you specifically have to be looking for or request to see, and early 1990 sport prototypes aren't exactly the highest thing on most people's priority lists. After all, Gran Turismo focuses on all types of cars, not just competition vehicles. I wouldn't count out the TS010 from a period in the game before the heat of the universe. A couple mods already exist for the TS010, but they all use an ancient model from F1 Challenge. The original mod was set to have pretty accurate physics for the time. I'd avoid the Assetto Corsa ports if I were you. There was also another TS010 mod planned for the people behind IER, a really well-received modding group, but that one may or may not have been abandoned. Let's move to a car from the power vacuum immediately after the Bernie implosion. Despite the past-facing name, Oldsmobile was GM's experimental brand. Introducing technologies like turbocharging and front-wheel drive to the American market, it enjoyed a decent slice of GM's market share. The Aurora was its attempt to compete with the premium European brands, but sales were sluggish. General Motors returned to Pratt & Miller to add some competition-flavored excitement to this swoopy coupe. The IMSA GTS1 category was the fastest category of GT racing in the US at the time. A well-run GTS1 could harass lower prototypes in a good day. Honestly, the pointy end of GTS1 were just silhouettes anyway, and that's what the Oldsmobile Aurora GTS1 was after all. As far as I can tell with the limited info floating around, only the lights and engine were shared with the production car. All the better, as a front-wheel drive GT car with a 650 horsepower V8 would be a complete disaster. Speaking of which, the Aurora's V8 is a marked departure from the typical GM small block. The 4-liter aluminum block unit used dual overhead cams and can rev to nearly 11,000 RPM. Furthermore, it still had a cross-plane crankshaft, so spectators were treated to a sound like a cup car on steroids. This engine would also be used in the Riley Mark III that the Aurora shared the track with, as well as a portion of the Indy Racing League field. The Aurora would feature a 5-speed transaxle operating via H-pattern shifter and independent rear suspension. Is what I would say if Incident banned those things at the last minute for GTS1 cars. Therefore, the Aurora would run a solid rear axle like it was a Trans Am car, and its gearbox would bolt directly behind the engine. According to the IMSA GTS1 rules, cars with a 4-liter fuel-injected dual overhead cam engine had to weigh a minimum of 2,530 pounds, so let's assume that's how much the Aurora weighed. Since the base Aurora looked the way it did, the GTS1 variant had a blobbish sea creature appearance to look more modern than the rest of the field, or in the European GT1 guest cars. This includes the janky WSC prototypes. Another concession to IMSA rules was the total lack of a rear diffuser. Underbody aero was a no-go in 90s IMSA besides the flat floor plan. Thanks to IMSA trying desperately to make WSCs look like a top class, the Aurora GTS would be old-school style bones, supporting a thoroughly modern heart and body. The factory Oldsmobile effort enjoyed a successful 1996. Starting the season strongly with a class win at Daytona, the Aurora GTS1 would go on to score 8 pole positions and an equal number of podiums, take the championship with ease. IMSA footage and information from that era is hard to come by, so bear with me for the kind of threadbare explanation. This is meant to be a video that requires less effort than the usual Featherfin video, after all. The following year, at least one was sold to Robinson Racing, who used a Chevrolet engine in theirs. The works livery was replaced with an equally cool Hot Wheels scheme. Their biggest success of the season was a class win in the Sebring 12 Hours. Unfortunately for Robinson Racing's championship hopes, the Aurora would have to compete with the Pano GTR1 and Porsche 911 GT1 Evo. A non-factory supported Trans Am style car had no chance against the 200 kg lighter FIA GT1 spec cars, which reliably challenged for overall wins. As one of the teams that chose what would become Grand Am post-American sports car split, racing against even more blatant prototypes as a quote-unquote GT was not in Robinson's plans, and the team bought a Riley & Scott Mark III in 1998. Winning is fun, after all. Professional sports car was also not a fan of the tube-frame GT so common in pre-split IMSA and outlawed them. The Pratt & Miller Aurora's career would therefore be cut short by politics, the tumultuous state of sports car racing, and the new Corvette C5R project that Pratt & Miller were cooking up. At face value, the Aurora GTS1 has a major problem in getting the license to appear in games. Oldsmobile no longer exists. Good thing it's a GM sub-brand, so there's still people to talk to about it. At least two of them still exist, but the running one uses a Chevrolet V8. The Aurora engine was reportedly temperamental, and the more reliable small block Chevy gets the job done just fine. Another factor counting against the Aurora appearing anywhere is the relative obscurity of the era it raced in. This car has a sparkling pedigree, yet nobody includes it in their list of great American race cars. That's because of the aforementioned 90s IMSA IRL style split around the same time. Since the world's sports cars and tube chassis GTs were a far cry from the glory days of GTP, fewer people cared about 90s IMSA, so it seemed to fade from fan consciousness. At the very most, you need the 333 SP and Cunningham 300ZX from the era. There is a small amount of hope for this thing to appear in Forza Motorsport since the game added its cutless predecessor and likes anecdotes to random old race cars. Either way, an Untitled Forza mod for the Aurora does exist. However, it is kind of janky, so keep that in mind. This car represents the 90s Le Mans power vacuum era's culmination. Its achievements provided valuable guidelines for future race car designers to keep in the back of their heads, much like the BMW V12 LMR and Toyota TS020 it competed against. The CLR was the third car Mercedes' three-year attempt to win Le Mans in the late 1990s. The previous two attempts, the COK GTR and COK LM, won almost everything else but lacked reliability, a death sentence for a car designed for endurance races. This third time was the charm when it came to the car holding together, but the CLR failed its mission in a pretty infamous fashion. Compared to its predecessors, the CLR straddled the line between evolution and revolution. Let's start with the engine. The GT108C was a 5.7-liter V8 resting directly behind the cockpit. Reinforced induction, the 32-valve dual overhead cam power plant had its breathing restricted by a pair of 32mm restrictors. Despite the mandatory reduced airflow, the CLR could count on about 600 horsepower delivered to the rear wheels. Compared to the higher revving 5-liter V8 of the COK LM, the GT108C was meant to be a low-stress, tractable unit. The crankshaft was cross-planed for better primary and secondary balance at the cost of revs. Also, a flat-plane V8 of that size would be a vibrating mess, someone tell Chevrolet that. Channeling all of that power to the rear wheels with a 6-speed sequential transmission from X-Track. Basically standard issue for top-flight sports cars with a budget in that era. Push-rod double wishbone suspension was utilized on both ends of the car, as there doesn't appear to be a third spring. The chassis was a carbon fiber monocoque for maximum stiffness and safety. All of this is wrapped in low-drag bodywork that Mercedes thought would help them cut through the air better than their competitors. The CLR had longer overhangs than its competition, creating a greater plant area for the air to act on, but with catastrophic consequences if the car had its nose pointed upward in any way. Furthermore, the CLR didn't produce very much front downforce, or downforce in general for that matter, leading to the car's nervous attitude at speed. The CLR weighed a bit over 2,000 pounds, fairly standard for the area. Overall, the CLR had a conservative design strategy executed radically. Big engine with minimal drag. The CLR had an illustrious, lengthy racing career of one race, the 1999 24 Hours of Le Mans. Mercedes would bring 3 of the silver arrows to try and hit the big bullseye in France. After setting competitive times with little drama during pre-qualifying, Mercedes had no idea of the disaster that would await them in June. The first sign of trouble was the number 4 car going airborne in qualifying after slipstreaming a competitor. The car landed on its side and was replaced with a spare chassis. 4th, 7th, and 10th on the grid were the results of a session that led to a few raised eyebrows in the Mercedes camp. Not bad, but there's 24 hours of race to run. Morning warm-up featured flip number 2, which was unfortunately in front of TV cameras, which only capture still photos. Car number 4 was afflicted again and would be immediately withdrawn from the race. The panicky Mercedes crew hastily attached small front dive frames to the remaining pair of cars, apparently increasing front downforce by 25%. Just by looking at the tiny strips of aluminum, you can tell that the CLR barely produced front load in the first place. The race would start with the 2 remaining cars challenging for the lead from the word go. Onboard footage showed the car bouncing around a bit more than the remarkably stable Toyota. Takuya Yura of Mooncraft remarked on this in the Japanese coverage, wondering if another flight episode was inevitable.
Oh my god, the Mercedes has taken off.
Yura was proven right within 4 hours. After the Mercedes CLR went flying on live television, the sister car was immediately withdrawn from the race, and Mercedes' Top Flight sports car program cancelled right after. Mercedes would not return to Le Sarthe in official capacity in person until 2025. Mercedes is obviously quite embarrassed that they made a car with such an obvious design flaw. The CLR was their 3rd car to have left the ground at Le Sarthe in spectacular fashion, thankfully without killing anybody, so it's obvious why they haven't spoken very much about it. At least one of them still exists, owned by a German museum, as HWA kept car number 6 safe in its headquarters for a while. Directly licensing the car from Mercedes would be a tall order. The CLR's predecessors appear frequently enough across racing in the closed-circuit focus, implying that Mercedes itself isn't too keen on granting privileges to use the CLR officially. Ford said some of the biggest thinkers of the last decade to race at Le Mans in its car roster, like the Aston Martin AMR1, the Nissan GT-R LM Nismo, and the RSR Jaguar XA whatever GTE that sucked, implying that comical lack of performance isn't keeping them from adding certain cars. The car's murky whereabouts until recently haven't helped matters either. Because of these factors, don't hold your breath on seeing the CLR on a game's car roster. The closest thing anyone's gonna get to driving the CLR in a game officially is the free CLR mod by URD for sale course in R Factor 2. Its 3D model is probably the most detailed model the car will ever get in its lifetime, and it drives how you expect it would. It's pretty stable in a straight line, but the front end can get light at high speeds. The cornering balance tends towards quarter-inch understeer on the stock setup. And yes, it can and will flip, especially if you mess up the setup, or go for a steep crest, or slipstream the wrong car. Look at it, buddy. Exaggeration. Now let's talk about plucky challengers to Audi era hegemony. Twin top categories had been nothing new at Le Mans. Between prototypes and sports cars in the 60s and 70s, as well as GT1 and LMP in the 1990s, offering manufacturers multiple avenues to compete for the ultimate prize gave the grid a certain je ne sais quoi. LMP 675 was the second to last and most ill-fated attempt. The MG Lola EX257, aka the Lola B01 was the first car built especially for those LMP 675 regulations to turn a wheel in anger. It was also one of the last products from a British-owned MG before the company went bust and the assets snapped up by the Chinese. This thing was made of cardboard to fit the rules. A grenade courtesy of MG and AER is mounted behind the driver. With this winning combination, the MG Lola drivers piloted a ticking time bomb of British reliability as they prayed their car would hold together each other. Wait, I actually like this car. Let's start over with an actual description. LMP 675 cars were meant to match their LMP 900 counterparts through lightweight and nimbleness. Their engine sizes would therefore be limited to 2 liters for turbo cars and 3.4 liters for NA cars. The EX257, as it was initially designed, used the MG XP20 or AER P07 2-liter turbocharged 4-cylinder. Despite this engine layout being ubiquitous in cars, I've yet to mention a car powered by a 2-liter turbocharged 4-cylinder on this channel. With the mandatory intake restrictors, the P07 made around 450 to 500 highly stressed horsepower. This lightweight engine was placed behind the carbon fiber monocoque, unlike the aluminum one of its B2K40 predecessor. Suspension was the standard push rods on both sides. Since the car wouldn't have the power of the bigger cars they'd compete against, Lola's main focus was reducing drag. The rear wing was mounted quite low. The car was also physically smaller than the LMP 900 cars in an effort to reach the optimistic minimum weight figure, which were missed by 15 kilograms. That was fine. It's the other existing LMP 675 cars were horrifically slow to being converted from other categories and not optimized for LMP 675 itself. Overall, the car will resemble both the B2K40 SR2 as well as all the Lola LMPs that followed it, giving this sort of lithogenese vibe compared to the other sucker-mounted catfishes in the Lorca-Riidae. Lithogenese has the general shape and funny pelvic fins of the atropleopid catfishes, yet has the armor of the Lorca-Riidae. Like the Lola MG, both parties have a smallish frontal area cut through their rushing fluid milieu. Shoehorn fish reference aside, the Lola MG EX257 was a fitting vehicle for MG's return to Le Mans. A small open car making its pace through agility rather than outright power. The LMP 675 class wouldn't know what hit it. Le Mans 2001 would serve as the EX257's trial by fire. LMP 675 cars had nowhere else to race in Europe, so MG had no other choice but to debut at the biggest race of the season. They'd enter a pair of cars and handily take the class pole. This sounds fine until you realize the LMP 675 cars were meant to compete with LMP 900s, and these Lolas were about 7 seconds off the pace. The monsoon tier race start would help the Lolas a bit by not having to push the cars so hard, but the British reliability reared its ugly head soon as the race starts. Both cars were out before lap 40. It didn't even get dark. Despite the somewhat muted showing at Le Mans, the car's potential led to 3 teams purchasing EX257s for the 2002 American Le Mans Series: Nighthawk, Intersport, and Dyson later on this season. The cars proved fragile, but flashed the pace in customer hands. Le Mans 2002 would have the Lola ranks bolstered by Nighthawk. Still lacking true competition within the class, the Works MGs qualified within striking distance of pole, showing the class's true intent 2 years after its initial inception. Successive 24-hour events still elude the EX257 as all 3 cars DNF'd, though not as quickly as last time. MG would end its Le Mans program and had to figure out how to keep the lights on. Dyson would therefore take over as the most prominent EX257 operator, and take over they did, readily challenging the Audi R8s on pace, and even taking a win over them in Sonoma 2003. The sinuous California track set in the same area as that one Windows XP background suited the Lolas quite well. Intersport would ditch the MG engine for a Judd KB675 V8 in the interest of improving reliability. Its improvement in that regard was marginal. Because of the lack of MG parts, the Intersport car would revert to its codename of B0160. Well-known British racing team RML would purchase one for the 2003 European Le Mans Series. RML's car proved the success that season, taking the class championship. 2004 would bring a rethink of the ACO prototype class structure. LMP 675 and LMP 900 would be merged into LMP1, while LMP2 would be a cheaper class for cars that's similar in spirit to the other cars that actually raced in 675. Dyson would still keep taking a couple wins off Audi, but the best prototypes of the generation would still prove dominant. Still, giving the Audi R8 something to think about is a highly impressive feat. MG as a Chinese brand appears in games on occasion. Their Cyberster is the most interesting thing in the lineup along with their TCRs. Early 2000s prototypes are sort of a neglected era in recent years, with only the Audi R8 and Bentley Speedy appearing with any regularity. The B0160 is a couple orders of magnitude more obscure, so racing game devs likely forgot it existed despite being a manufacturer entry. Another factor to consider is that most of the B0160s appear to be in private ownership. The RML and one of the Dyson cars are still with their original teams. They do occasionally appear in historic racing, so at least they're getting some exercise. The RML car appeared in the background of a few of the Project Motor Racing promo videos, so the car is on that team's radar. We'll see, insert a preposition here, the game comes out. The B0160s have been modded into a few G-Motor games and Assetto Corsa, using a model made when the car was still actively winning races. Although it's still a bit work in progress, grab the RMS version for Assetto Corsa if you want to drive this thing. At the very least, has multiple engine configurations and the correct technical specs. Lastly, let's go left field and cover a car built after the Twin Towers fell. NASCAR is the most prominent racing series in the United States, thanks to recognizable cars, drivers with star power, and its regional competition imploding. It's a bit less popular in other countries, especially European ones, thanks to the frequent crashes and the peanut gallery not realizing how much finesse it takes to pilot one of these beasts around the oval at 180 miles an hour. NASCAR just recently introduced the Gen 7 machine, a technological tool of the Ford compared to its predecessor, and wanted to expand the sport's reach. Chevrolet Camaro Garage 56 was NASCAR's 24-hour-long advertisement. Hendrick Motorsports, IMSA, Chevrolet, and Action Express Racing came together to prove to a global audience that NASCAR is worth watching. The Gen 7 Cup car is the most technologically advanced NASCAR stock car yet. Featuring composite body panels, a rear diffuser, a 5-speed spin-controlled transaxle, and tens of flaps to prevent the car from going airborne and pointed in the wrong direction at speed, it seems closer to a 90s GT car than the beasts of the prior generation that still use technology dating back to the 1960s. Honestly, one of those would have been funnier to take around the stars, but it would have required even more modifications than the Garage 56 Camaro got. The engine is the same Chevrolet R07 5.8-liter small block used in NASCAR since the mid-2000s. The iron block pushrod engine delivers 670-ish horsepower in Garage 56 spec, but is capable of a lot more. This engine had never run 24 hours straight before, so it was a good call to run a conservative tune. One of the most obvious additions to the Garage 56 Camaro was functional lighting. Circuit de la Stars gets pretty dark at night because the wrench tank it's a waste to put Daytona-style flood lighting around 8.5 miles of track. Sets of LEDs were mounted where the light stickers normally go on the Cup car. The bodywork was suddenly changed from the Cup car alongside adding a pair of side mirrors, a splitter, and stacks of dive planes on the front and rear planes. Why rear dive planes? NASCAR wanted to maintain a close visual identity to the normal Cup car, so they forego the rear wing. Le Mans 2023 would be the Le Mans with the largest amount of cars sans rear wings since the 1970s, since there was also that pair of Peugeots. The suspension was the same double wishbone suspension as used in the normal Cup car. Since next-gen Cup cars no longer use a solid rear axle like the predecessors, the Garage 56 variant can take corners without being a roadblock to the other cars. Despite the modern technology, standard next-gen cars still weigh over 3,400 pounds thanks to some of the extra reinforcement the car needs to take the frequent high-speed crashes so frequent in NASCAR. Endurance racing is much less of a contact sport, so the Garage 56 car lost some of the scaffolding to come in at a weight of 2,940 pounds. With the weight loss and extra downforce, the ACO and NASCAR expected the car to run around GTE pace. Overall, the Camaro Garage 56 had some of the spirit of the old IMSA GTO cars. a big V8 and tube-frame chassis combined with contemporary technology. As a Garage 56 car, the Camaro wasn't running for class points. It only had to race the clock and be there at the end, as well as stay out of the other racers' way. Despite the greater power, the Camaro-shaped beast had a lower than you'd think top speed thanks to the steep spoiler angle the car was initially mandated to run. The Garage 56 was allowed to reduce the angle a bit to make overtaking easier. The car ran at 347 in qualifying, which was faster than the GTM field by several seconds and was in the same ballpark as the GTE Pro cars the year prior. Thanks to the higher power output, the Garage 56 Camaro was even able to overtake LMP2 cars off corner exits. The Camaro ran a largely trouble-free race for the first 20 or so hours. Fans were treated to a full NASCAR-style pit stop every time the car came in to refill its consumables. Unfortunately, around the 20th hour marks the car's major issue with the gearbox, so they had to waste an hour replacing it. Normally, this wouldn't be allowed, but since the car was a fan favorite running unclassified, the ACO decided to make an exception. Eventually, the Camaro crossed the finish line in 39th. The best finish for a quote-unquote true Garage 56 project ever, as all the others failed to finish and the ones that did were merely LMP2 cars modified for a certain disabled driver. Le Mans 2023 would be the car's last competitive outing for now, though it still does demo runs to promote NASCAR. It's definitely a car many fans, myself included, want to see running in anger again. Maybe Toyota and Ford should have built rivals. As a rolling billboard for NASCAR, it's a shock that this car hasn't appeared in anything almost 2 years after the fact. NASCAR is fine with licensing out its cars for other games, provided that they aren't branded as the official NASCAR game, as that's iRacing's job. Chevrolet and GM also appear to be fairly easy to convince to fork over their cars. GM products appear nearly everywhere they be relevant, especially their contemporary sports models. Since the car was a massive fan favorite and two cars exist and work in order, it's only a matter of time until we can drive it virtually. The car shows up in the data mine for Automobilista 2, but predicting content drops for that game is like trying to predict the weather a year in advance. In the meantime, you can drive the next gen in its normal form in iRacing, or dig around for the quite dubious Assetto Corsa mod. A lot of cars in this series have Assetto Corsa mods, don't they? And there you have it, 5 race cars that have never officially appeared in the game, but should. Due to the nature of this video, feel free to suggest future cars that I can talk about. Who knows? This may be a series I could use to stall time as I figure out how to make the videos requiring greater brain power and effort. Featherfin Films, disparate topics in deep detail. This is an Adontis Man signing off. Adios.